Chapter 1. The Beginning of Fear. Ayumi tightened her grip on the cardboard box as she pushed open the door to her new apartment. The place was small, old, and smelled faintly of dust and something else. Something metallic. She wrinkled her nose but brushed it off. Tokyo's affordable apartments rarely came without their quirks. The sun was already setting, casting an eerie orange glow through the lone window. The apartment had a single room with a tiny kitchen, a futon folded in the corner, and a bathroom at the far end. The mirror above the sink was cracked at the edge, as if someone had punched it long ago. As she unpacked, her fingers brushed against something rough on the wooden floor, a loose floorboard. Curious, she pried it open, revealing a folded, yellowed piece of paper tucked beneath. The paper was brittle, the ink smudged as if someone had written it in a hurry. "Do not look into the mirror at midnight." Ayumi frowned. Was this some kind of prank left by the previous tenant? With a nervous chuckle, she tossed the paper aside. Superstitions were common in Japan, especially in old buildings. Night fell quickly. Ayumi turned on the single ceiling light, its flickering bulb casting shadows that stretched unnaturally along the walls. As she prepared for bed, exhaustion settled in. The stress of moving had taken its toll, and all she wanted was a good night's sleep. But just as she began to drift off, a sound broke the silence, whispering. It was faint, almost too quiet to notice, like a breath just behind her ear. She bolted upright, her heart pounded against her ribs. Had she imagined it? The apartment was completely still, no sound of footsteps. No creaking floorboards, just the distant hum of traffic outside. Slowly she turned her head towards the bathroom. The mirror was facing her. The whisper came again. A chill crawled up her spine. Holding her breath, she slid under the blanket, forcing herself to ignore it. It was just her imagination, just exhaustion playing tricks on her. But as sleep pulled her back into its embrace, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. And from the darkness of the mirror, something watched back. Chapter 2. The Legend of the Slit-Mouthed Woman. The next morning, Ayumi awoke to a strange sense of unease, as if the remnants of last night's whispers still clung to the air. She glanced toward the bathroom mirror, half expecting to see something unnatural staring back, but it only reflected her pale, tired face. She shook off the feeling and got ready for class. At the university, she met up with her friend Haruto, a cheerful guy who always had an interest in urban legends. As they ate lunch in the crowded cafeteria, she hesitated before bringing up what had happened. "Hey, Haruto, do you believe in ghosts?" Haruto smirked. "Why? Did you see one?" "Not exactly," Ayumi muttered. "I heard whispering last night, and I found a weird note under the floor." His expression shifted from amusement to curiosity. What did it say? Something about not looking in the mirror at midnight. Haruto froze for a second, then leaned in. His voice dropped to a whisper. That sounds like Kuchi Sakeona. Ayumi frowned. Who? You've never heard of her? He grinned, but there was a nervous edge to it. She's one of the scariest urban legends in Japan. They call her the Slit-Mouthed Woman. Ayumi felt a chill creep up her spine. The story goes that she was once a beautiful woman, but her husband, in a jealous rage, sliced her mouth open from ear to ear. Now she wanders at night, wearing a surgical mask. She approaches people and asks, "Am I beautiful?" If you say no, she kills you. If you say yes, she removes the mask and asks again. Haruto's voice dropped lower. If you say no the second time, she slashes you in half. If you say yes, she makes you just like her. Ayumi swallowed. That's just a story, right? Haruto shrugged. Maybe, but people have reported seeing her in quiet streets, train stations, even reflections. Ayumi tried to laugh it off, but the uneasy feeling in her stomach remained. That night, as she walked home, the streets were emptier than usual. The orange glow of the streetlights cast long, distorted shadows. She could hear her own footsteps echoing, and then another set of footsteps joined hers. Her heart pounded. She quickened her pace. The footsteps behind her did the same. Slowly she turned her head. At the end of the dimly lit street stood a woman in a beige coat. Her long dark hair fell over her face, and a white surgical mask covered her mouth. She wasn't moving, but Ayumi could feel her eyes, watching, waiting. Chapter 3. A Warning Too Late. Ayumi's breath hitched. The woman stood perfectly still under the flickering streetlight, her face partially obscured by the shadows and the white surgical mask. Her presence was unnatural, too silent, too still, like a mannequin that had been misplaced in the real world. Ayumi forced herself to look away and quickened her pace. It's just a coincidence, she told herself. People wear masks all the time, but the footsteps behind her continued, soft, steady, matching hers perfectly. Her throat tightened. A cold sweat prickled her skin. She gripped the strap of her bag, resisting the urge to break into a sprint. If she ran, would the woman chase her? A gust of wind blew through the empty street, rustling the trees. Ayumi risked another glance over her shoulder. The woman was closer. Ayumi's stomach lurched. She hadn't heard any running, no hurried steps, yet the woman had halved the distance between them. That was the moment she knew. She isn't human. Her legs moved on their own, breaking into a desperate run. The sound of her pounding footsteps echoed through the empty street. But no matter how fast she went, the air felt thick, like she was running in a nightmare. Then the whisper came. Am I beautiful? Ayumi's blood ran cold. The voice was soft, melodic, but filled with something wrong, like a rusted blade wrapped in silk. She didn't stop. She didn't turn around. She ran until she reached her apartment door, fumbling with the keys, her hands trembling. Finally, she burst inside and slammed the door shut, locking it. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she pressed her back against the wood. Silence. The hallway outside was eerily quiet. No footsteps, no whispering, just the distant hum of the city. Had she imagined it? Ayumi squeezed her eyes shut, trying to calm her racing heart. Then, knock, knock, knock. Her eyes snapped open. The knocks were slow and deliberate. Right on the other side of the door, she held her breath. Silence again. A full minute passed. 2. With shaky steps, she approached the peephole and hesitantly looked through. The hallway was empty. Ayumi exhaled a shaky breath, half laughing in relief. Maybe it really was just her nerves. Maybe. She turned away. And then from the bathroom the mirror creaked. A whisper crawled into her ears. Am I beautiful? Ayumi's scream echoed through the apartment. Chapter 4. The First Encounter. Ayumi stumbled backward, her breath caught in her throat. The whisper had come from inside her apartment, from the mirror. Her heart pounded violently against her ribs as she turned her head, eyes locking onto the bathroom door. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness peeking through. She swore she had left it closed. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, creak. The bathroom door shifted, opening just an inch more. Ayumi's knees nearly gave out. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She felt like prey trapped in the gaze of something unseen, something waiting in the shadows. Then, ever so slowly, a pale hand slid into view from behind the doorframe. Ayumi choked on a scream and bolted. She ran for the front door, fingers fumbling desperately at the lock. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely grip the knob. Click, click, click. Her breath caught. Her reflection in the hallway mirror was moving on its own. Ayumi wasn't moving, but her reflection was. It was tilting its head, staring at her with wide, unblinking eyes. A sickening sense of dread coiled in her stomach. The reflection's lips began to part. Then, knock, knock, knock. The sound came from the apartment door. Ayumi jolted, spinning around. She was trapped between whatever was inside the bathroom and whatever was standing outside her door. She squeezed her eyes shut. This isn't real. This isn't real. The knocking came again, louder this time. Then from the bathroom the whisper slithered through the air once more. Am I beautiful? Ayumi's body stiffened. Her mind screamed at her not to answer. Then from the hallway outside, a new voice, distorted, as if spoken through a mask, repeated the question. Am I beautiful? Her breath came in ragged gasps. She knew the legend. She knew the rules. If she answered no, she would die. If she answered yes, she would suffer a fate worse than death. Tears burned at her eyes. Her only chance was to not answer at all. The knocking stopped. The whispering ceased. The bathroom door creaked, and then went still. Ayumi slowly backed away, heart hammering against her chest. The apartment was silent. Minutes passed. Finally, with shaking hands, she reached for her phone and called Haruto. "Please," she whispered into the receiver, "I need your help." Chapter 5. The Mark of the Cursed. Haruto arrived within 30 minutes. Ayumi barely managed to unlock the door before collapsing into his arms, her body trembling uncontrollably. He guided her to the couch, concern etched deep into his face. "Ayumi, what happened?" His voice was steady, but she could hear the slight tremor beneath his words. She struggled to find the words. "She was here, Haruto. In my apartment. The slit-mouthed woman. She whispered to me. She knocked on my door. Her voice cracked. She was in the mirror." Haruto's face paled. He grabbed her wrist firmly. "Did you answer her?" Ayumi shook her head, her breath still uneven. "No, I didn't say anything. I just ran." A long silence stretched between them. Then Haruto exhaled, rubbing his temples. "That might have saved you. For now." Ayumi swallowed hard. "What do you mean, for now?" Haruto hesitated before speaking, his voice low. "Kuchisake Onna doesn't just go away. If she's noticed you, she'll keep coming back. You're marked now." Marked. The word sent a chill down Ayumi's spine. She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. "What do I do? How do I get rid of her?" Haruto stood and paced the small apartment. "There are ways people claim you can escape her. Some say answering her with something confusing, like your average, can make her leave. Others say throwing candy at her distracts her long enough to run." He frowned. "But if she's already inside your mirrors, this is worse than I thought." Ayumi buried her face in her hands. "I don't know what to do. I don't even know why she came after me." Then she felt it. A dull, stinging pain along her cheek. Her breath hitched as she ran to the bathroom mirror. With shaky hands, she turned on the light and slowly lifted her chin. A thin, red scratch ran down her left cheek. It hadn't been there before. Haruto appeared behind her, eyes widening. "Oh no!" Ayumi's fingers hovered over the scratch, her pulse pounding in her ears. "What does this mean?" Haruto swallowed hard. "It means she's already touched you." Ayumi's stomach twisted. She felt lightheaded, like the room was spinning. Haruto's voice was grave. "You don't have much time." Chapter 6. The Mirror's Curse. Ayumi stared at her reflection, her fingers trembling over the thin red scratch on her cheek. It wasn't deep, but it burned, like something inside the wound was eating away at her skin. She turned to Haruto. eyes pleading. What do you mean I don't have much time? Haruto's expression was grim. He hesitated before answering, as if choosing his words carefully. The stories say that once Kuchisake Onna touches you, she's claimed you. He swallowed hard. It means she'll keep coming back, and each time she'll get closer, until Ayumi felt her stomach twist. Until what? Haruto exhaled. Until she takes your face. The word sent an icy blade of terror through Ayumi's chest. She backed away from the mirror, heart pounding. No, there has to be a way to stop this. There has to be. Haruto clenched his jaw. I don't know, Ayumi. There are rumors, but they're just that. Rumors. Some say if you can trick her, she'll leave you alone. But I've never heard of someone escaping once she's marked them. Ayumi felt the air grow thick around her. The weight of fear pressed down on her chest. What about a shrine, a priest, an exorcism? Haruto hesitated again, then nodded slowly. A shrine might help, but it depends on the type of spirit we're dealing with. Kuchisake Onna is different from a normal ghost. She's not just a wandering soul. She's a curse. Ayumi's breath hitched. A curse? Haruto sat down, rubbing his temples. The legend says she wasn't just killed. She was created, a woman betrayed, mutilated, and turned into something beyond human. She isn't a spirit you can just banish. She's something worse, something bound to the mirrors, the darkness, the whispers. A cold chill slithered down Ayumi's spine. Then something creaked. Both of them snapped their heads toward the bathroom door. It was slightly open again. The mirror inside faced the hallway, reflecting just enough light to reveal movement. Ayumi's breath caught in her throat. Haruto, she whispered. Haruto stood up slowly, eyes locked on the mirror. We need to leave. Now. But before they could move, the lights flickered. The apartment darkened in an instant, the single ceiling bulb struggling to stay alive. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls. The air grew cold. Then came the whisper. Am I beautiful? Ayumi's body froze. The voice wasn't coming from the hallway. It was inside the apartment. The bathroom mirror shuddered. The cracked glass twisted, as if something was pressing against it from the other side. Then a hand slid out of the reflection. Pale, bony. The fingers long and unnaturally sharp. The whisper came again. Softer this time. Am I beautiful? Ayumi let out a strangled gasp as a face began to emerge from the mirror. Long dark hair spilled out first, wet and clinging to the thing's face. Then, a white surgical mask. And beneath it, something moving. Something grinning. The mask slowly began to peel away. Haruto grabbed Ayumi's arm and yanked her towards the door. Don't look, move. Ayumi stumbled after him, her body sluggish as if the air itself had thickened around her. The whisper followed them, slithering into their ears. Don't you want to see? Haruto flung open the apartment door, dragging Ayumi into the hallway. He slammed it shut behind them, panting. For a moment, silence. Then, bang, bang, bang. The door shook violently as something slammed against it from the other side. Haruto didn't hesitate. He grabbed Ayumi's wrist and pulled her down the hall. "We're getting out of here, now!" Ayumi's mind was a whirlwind of terror, but she forced her legs to move. They ran, down the stairs, out into the cold night, away from the thing that had stepped out of the mirror. But even as they reached the empty streets panting, Ayumi knew deep inside this wasn't over. She was marked, and Kuchisake Onna would come back again and again until she took everything. Chapter 7: The Shrine of the Forsaken. The cold night air burned Ayumi's lungs as she and Haruto sprinted down the empty streets. Her legs ached, her heart pounded, but she didn't dare stop, not when she could still hear the whisper in her ears. "Am I beautiful?" Even though they had left the apartment far behind, it felt like the voice was crawling inside her skull. Haruto didn't stop until they reached the train station. He doubled over, hands on his knees, gasping for breath. Ayumi wasn't any better. Her entire body was trembling violently. Where do we go?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Haruto looked up, his eyes dark with something between fear and determination. "There's a shrine," he said between breaths. "A forgotten one. It's not well known, but I've heard. People used to go there when they were cursed." Ayumi's heart skipped a beat. "And did it work?" Haruto hesitated. Then, after a long pause, he muttered, "I don't know, but it's our best shot." The last train arrived minutes later. They boarded in silence, the flickering lights inside the carriage casting eerie shadows on the empty seats. Ayumi kept her hands clenched in her lap, afraid to look into the windows. What if she saw something staring back at her? As the train moved, the exhaustion finally hit her. Her body was drained, but each time her eyelids fluttered shut, she saw the pale hand crawling out of the mirror. She couldn't rest. Not now. After nearly an hour, the train arrived at a desolate rural station. The air smelled damp, and the only sound was the distant rustling of trees. The shrine was still a long walk away, hidden deep within the forest. "We need to hurry," Haruto said. "It's dangerous to be out at night." Ayumi swallowed hard. "More dangerous than what's following me." Haruto didn't answer. He just started walking. The forest was darker than anything Ayumi had ever experienced. The canopy overhead was so thick that barely any moonlight seeped through. The only light came from Haruto's phone, but even that felt weak against the oppressive shadows. The deeper they went, the heavier the air became. It was as if the trees were watching them. Then Ayumi noticed something strange. The whispers hadn't stopped. They were faint, blending with the rustling leaves, but they were there, and they were everywhere. "Am I beautiful? Am I beautiful? Am I beautiful?" She spun around. Nothing. Just trees. Just a darkness. But the whispers didn't stop. Haruto must have heard them too, because he grabbed her wrist and pulled her forward. "We're close. Just a little farther." Then, a shadow moved ahead of them. Ayumi's breath caught in her throat. She grabbed Haruto's arm. "Did you see that?" Haruto slowly lifted his phone, the weak light illuminating the path. A torii gate stood in the distance. its wooden beams weathered and covered in moss. Beyond it, the shrine loomed, a small, decrepit structure, barely standing. But that wasn't what made Ayumi's blood run cold. Standing beneath the torii gate was a woman. She was still, unmoving. Her long black hair covered most of her face, but Ayumi could see the white mask, the same one she had seen in the mirror. Haruto pulled her behind a tree, his breathing uneven. Shit! She's here! Ayumi's entire body turned ice cold. She followed us. Haruto shook his head. No, I think she was waiting. The woman didn't move. She simply stood there, as if guarding the shrine. But the worst part, even though her face was hidden, Ayumi knew she was looking at her. The whispers returned, this time in a chorus. Am I beautiful? Am I beautiful? Am I beautiful? Haruto clenched his jaw. We have to go through. If this shrine has any power, it's our only chance. Ayumi felt sick. But what if, before she could finish, the woman tilted her head. Then she took a step forward. The mask began to slip, and Ayumi knew if she saw what was beneath it, she wouldn't survive. Haruto grabbed her hand. Run, now! They ran, straight toward the shrine, straight toward whatever fate awaited them. Chapter 8. The Forgotten Ritual. Ayumi and Haruto sprinted toward the shrine, their breaths ragged, their hearts pounding like war drums in their chests. The woman under the torii gate moved, but not like a normal person. Her body jerked, as if invisible hands were pulling her forward in unnatural motions. Step, jerk, step. The mask on her face began to slide off, revealing glimpses of what lay beneath. Rotting flesh, gaping wounds, a mouth that stretched too wide, too wrong. Am I beautiful? The whisper was no longer soft. It boomed inside Ayumi's head, as if the words were clawing through her skull. She barely registered Haruto dragging her up the shrine steps. The wooden planks beneath their feet were ancient, rotting, groaning under their weight. The shrine itself was small and abandoned, but as they burst inside, something felt different. The air was thick, heavy with old prayers. Haruto slammed the shrine doors shut and locked them with a rusted wooden beam. That won't hold her for long, he gasped, his forehead drenched in sweat. Ayumi turned, eyes scanning the dark interior. It smelled of mold, incense, and something ancient. Dust hung in the air like mist. The only source of light was the faint glow of candles still burning at the altar, as if someone had just been here. Haruto! Ayumi's voice trembled. I don't think we're alone. Haruto cursed under his breath. There has to be something here, and some kind of thud. Something slammed against the shrine door. Ayumi flinched. The whisper came again, closer, clearer. Am I beautiful? The door shuddered violently as if 1,000 hands were clawing at it. Haruto grabbed Ayumi's wrist, pulling her towards the altar. The ritual. There has to be a way to end this. The altar was small, covered in faded paper talismans and a large cracked mirror. Strange symbols were carved into the wood. In front of the mirror lay an old scroll, its ink smeared with age. Ayumi grabbed it with shaking hands. This looks like a purification ritual. Haruto scanned the words quickly. What does it say? Ayumi swallowed, her mouth dry. It talks about a mirror curse, about how a vengeful spirit can be bound to a reflection. But if the right ritual is performed, the mirror can be sealed. Haruto's eyes widened. Then we have to do it. What do we need? Ayumi's hands trembled as she read further. Blood, she whispered. "A sacrifice must be made to seal the mirror. Someone must offer their face." Haruto stiffened. "What?" The shrine shook violently. The doors cracked. Then, a long bony hand slid through the gap in the wood. Pale, rotting, the fingernails too long, too sharp. The mask had finally fallen away. Ayumi's stomach lurched as she caught a glimpse of the horrific, mutilated mouth. The skin was torn wide, stretching impossibly far, revealing jagged blackened teeth and a mouth that never ended. She screamed. Haruto grabbed her shoulders. "Ayumi, what do we do?" Ayumi's mind raced. The ritual required blood, a sacrifice. Someone had to offer their face to the mirror, or her eyes darted to the mirror on the altar. She knew what she had to do. She lifted the shard of glass from the floor, the edges still sharp enough to cut. "Ayumi!" Haruto's voice was panicked. "What are you?" She slashed her palm open. Blood spilled onto the mirror. The reaction was instantaneous. The shrine erupted in an unnatural wind, the candles flickering wildly. The hand at the door began to jerk violently, as if being pulled back. The whispers turned into screams. "No, no, no!" The woman outside clawed desperately at the door, but the mirror drank Ayumi's blood like ink soaking into paper. The symbols glowed. The ritual was working. The shrine trembled one last time. Then, with a sound like shattering glass, the mirror split apart. Then, silence. The air went still. Haruto and Ayumi stayed frozen, their breath heavy in the suffocating silence. Then, slowly, Haruto moved to the door. He peered through the crack. She was gone. The torii gate stood empty, the forest eerily still. Ayumi collapsed onto the wooden floor, exhaustion crushing her. Did it work? Haruto turned back, his expression cautious. "I don't know." The mirror was shattered. The blood had vanished. The shrine felt empty now, like the curse had been lifted. Ayumi let out a shaky breath. It was over, or so she thought. Because as she looked down at her reflection in a shard of broken glass, the scratches on her cheek had deepened, and something moved inside the mirror, watching, waiting. Chapter 9: Reflections That Never Fade. The silence inside the shrine was unbearable. Ayumi's breath came in ragged gasps as she stared at the shattered mirror pieces scattered on the wooden floor. The flickering candlelight made the shards glow, distorting her reflection into 1,000 twisted versions of herself. But one shard was wrong. It wasn't reflecting the room. It was moving, as if something was lurking inside, watching her. A shiver crawled up her spine. Slowly she reached for the shard, her fingers trembling. "Don't!" Haruto's voice was sharp. "Don't touch it!" Ayumi stopped, swallowing hard. The moment her fingers hovered over the glass, a faint whisper slithered through the air. "You took my place." Her heart nearly stopped. Haruto grabbed her wrist and yanked her back. "We're leaving. Now!" Ayumi hesitated, her eyes still locked on the broken mirror. Something inside felt unfinished, as if this was not over. But the way the shadows flickered in the shrine, the way the wind outside had stopped completely, it felt like they were being watched. She didn't argue. They left the shrine in silence, stepping over the rotten wooden floorboards and into the cold night. The forest beyond the torii gate stretched endlessly into darkness, the trees looming, their gnarled branches twisting like skeletal fingers. But something was different now. The air felt lighter. The pressure that had crushed her chest for days was fading. Had they really broken the curse? They walked for what felt like hours before finally reaching the train station. The first sign of life in what felt like an eternity. The platform was empty, bathed in dim, flickering fluorescent light. The last train of the night was approaching, its headlights glowing like distant eyes in the dark. Ayumi exhaled in relief. We made it. Haruto nodded, but his face was still tense. He kept glancing at her. "Stop looking at me like that," she muttered. He didn't answer immediately. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "Your face, Ayumi, it's changing." Her stomach dropped. "What?" Haruto hesitated, as if unsure of what to say. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, switching it to selfie mode. "Look." Ayumi took the phone with shaky hands and lifted it to her face. Her reflection stared back at her, but it wasn't right. The scratches on her cheek had grown deeper, turning into dark, jagged lines. They stretched toward her lips, splitting the skin slightly at the edges of her mouth. It was faint, but it was there. A horrific thought crawled into her mind. "You took my place." The train screeched to a stop. The doors hissed open. Haruto grabbed her wrist. "Come on." But Ayumi couldn't move. She turned toward the windows of the train, staring at her reflection in the glass. The scratches were even deeper now. And then, her reflection smiled. But she didn't. A twisted, unnatural grin stretched across her reflected face, lips curling wider and wider until it looked almost inhuman. Her heart stopped. Then, from deep within the glass, the whisper came again. Closer, colder. "Am I beautiful now?" The train doors began closing. Haruto yanked her inside at the last second. The train pulled away, its lights fading into the darkness. Ayumi sat frozen, gripping the edge of her seat, her breathing erratic. The train was empty, save for them. But as the train passed through the tunnels, the windows reflected their image over and over again. And each time she looked, her reflection was smiling wider. Chapter 10. Smiles in the Dark. The train rumbled forward, cutting through the darkness like a blade. Ayumi sat rigid in her seat, gripping her trembling hands together, her fingernails digging into her skin. The inside of the train was eerily quiet, too quiet. The only sound was the rhythmic clatter of the wheels against the tracks. Haruto sat beside her, his knee bouncing anxiously. He kept stealing glances at her. She knew why. She could feel it. Something was wrong with her face, but she was too afraid to look again. Instead, she stared straight ahead, refusing to meet her own eyes in the train's windows. The reflection was still there, grinning. She wasn't. But the other Ayumi in the glass was. Her reflection's mouth was stretched too wide, the corners of her lips splitting slightly as if her skin was beginning to tear. Haruto broke the silence. "Ayumi, we need to get help." His voice was cautious, but she could hear the fear in it. Ayumi swallowed, her throat dry. "What kind of help?" Haruto hesitated. He didn't have an answer. There was a long pause. Then, the train lights flickered. A single sharp breath caught in Ayumi's throat. The reflection moved, not in sync with her. It tilted its head, slowly, unnaturally. Then its lips parted. "You took my place." The whisper slithered through the air, soft yet deafening. Haruto heard it too. His head snapped toward the window. "Shit!" Ayumi clenched her fists. "This isn't over, is it?" Haruto shook his head. "No, I think you've become a part of it." The lights flickered again. This time, they went out completely. For a moment, There was only darkness. Then, a sharp metallic screech tore through the silence. The train lurched violently. Ayumi was thrown forward, barely catching herself on the seat in front of her. The train's brakes screamed, grinding against the rails with a noise so loud it sent chills down her spine. The world outside the windows was pitch black. The train had stopped inside a tunnel. Haruto cursed, rubbing his head. What the hell just happened? Ayumi's breath came fast and shallow. Something felt wrong. Then she heard it. A soft tap, coming from the window beside her. A slow, deliberate tap. Tap, tap. Like someone or something was knocking. Ayumi's heart pounded as she forced herself to look. Her reflection was gone. Instead, a pair of pale hands pressed against the glass from the other side. Long, bony fingers dragging downward, leaving behind the trails of something dark and wet. Then, a face appeared. Her own face, but distorted. Wrong. Its mouth twisted into an inhuman grin, stretching wider than any human should be able to. The eyes were hollow, empty voids that devoured the light. Then, in a voice identical to hers, it spoke. "Give it back!" The train lurched forward again. Haruto grabbed her wrist. "Ayumi, don't look at it!" But she couldn't move. The thing in the window tilted its head, its cracked lips trembling, as if about to crawl through the glass. "Give it back!" The train light snapped on. The face was gone. The hands were gone. The window was empty again. Ayumi was shaking. Haruto was already pulling her up. "Come on, we're getting off this train." The train door suddenly hissed open, but the station outside was deserted. No signs, no people, just a long empty platform. And at the very end of it, a single mirror stood, facing them. And from within the glass, her reflection was waiting. Chapter 11. The Mirror's Embrace. The train door slid open with a slow, hissing breath. Ayumi and Haruto remained frozen in their seats, staring out at the deserted platform. The fluorescent lights above flickered erratically, casting distorted shadows that seemed to crawl along the walls. There was no station name, no signs, no exit. Just a single mirror standing at the end of the platform. Ayumi's blood ran cold. Her reflection was inside it. It stood waiting, a perfect replica of her, except for the grin. That same unnatural smile stretched across its face, the corners of its lips splitting wider and wider, as if its skin was peeling away. Haruto grabbed her wrist. "We're not getting off." But Ayumi knew. They had no choice. The train remained silent. The engine was dead. No announcement came. No sign of life existed anywhere except for the thing in the mirror. And then, the train lights flickered off again. Total darkness. A sound like shattered glass erupted through the air. Then, the lights snapped back on. The mirror was closer. No longer at the end of the platform. It was now just a few meters away. Ayumi's breath hitched. "It's moving," Haruto swore under his breath. "That's it. We run. We find a way out. No exits." The whisper crawled through the air, making their skin prickle. The mirror had moved again. Now it stood directly in front of the train doors. Ayumi felt something pulling her forward. A deep, aching pressure in her chest. A force she couldn't resist. Her feet began to move on their own. "Ayumi!" Haruto grabbed her arm, trying to hold her back, but the force was too strong. It dragged her forward, step by step, toward the waiting reflection. The closer she got, the clearer it became. Her other self inside the mirror was laughing. No sound. Just that horrific, twisted grin, its shoulders shaking in silent amusement. Then, it spoke. but its lips didn't match the words that slithered into Ayumi's ears. You took my place. Now, I'll take yours. Ayumi's own hands reached forward, pressing against the glass. Her fingers tingled, burned. The reflection's hands met hers, and then it poured. A force like ice-cold water swallowed Ayumi whole. She felt herself falling, sinking, drowning into the glass. Her vision warped, her body stretching, twisting. Haruto screamed her name, but his voice was fading. The last thing she saw before the world flipped inside out was Haruto's terrified face, growing smaller, further away. Then, everything went black. Chapter 12. The Other Side. Ayumi's breath caught in her throat as she plunged into the abyss. Cold, empty, silent. She was weightless, sinking deeper into the darkness, her body stretching like liquid. The world twisted, contorting into shapes that defied logic. Her screams echoed into nothingness. Then, she hit the ground. Ayumi gasped, her body collapsing onto something hard and cold. Her vision swam as she pushed herself up, her hands pressing against a smooth, glass-like surface. She was inside the mirror. The world around her was distorted, a perfect reflection of the train station, but wrong. The lights above flickered, but they cast no warmth. The platform stretched into an endless void. No exits, no train, no Haruto. And then, she saw her, the other Ayumi, standing just a few feet away, on the real side of the mirror. Haruto was shaking her, screaming her name, but the thing wearing her face only smiled. A slow, creeping grin. Ayumi lunged forward, slamming her fists against the mirror. "Haruto, I'm here!" But no sound came out. The mirror was soundproof. Haruto didn't see her. He only saw the thing pretending to be her. The reflection turned to him, blinking innocently. Then in Ayumi's own voice, it whispered, "Let's go home." Ayumi's blood froze. She pounded against the glass, desperate, frantic. "No, that's not me!" But her fists made no sound. Haruto hesitated, his brows furrowing. "Ayumi!" The reflection tilted its head. Then it smiled wider. Haruto's expression shifted. His grip on the fake Ayumi's arm tightened. He wasn't convinced. For a single blessed second, Ayumi thought he might see through the lie. But then, the train doors began to close. Panic shot through her veins like fire. "No, don't go!" The fake Ayumi turned one last time toward the mirror, and this time she saw it, a flicker of pure malice in her own stolen face. Then the train door shut, and with a soft final hiss, the train disappeared into the tunnel, leaving Ayumi alone, trapped forever. Epilogue. The next morning, Haruto sat in his apartment, staring at his phone. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Ayumi had been quiet ever since they left the train. Too quiet. When he looked into her eyes, they felt empty. And sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, she would smile. That same too-wide grin, like a crack slowly splitting open, and in the reflection of his coffee cup, just for a moment, he swore he saw another face. A pair of hands beating against the glass. The end.